Hello, I am Beyhan Karahan, a professor at the New York Institute of Technology, School of Architecture and Design. I've been teaching here since the mid-80s. Usually I teach studios and history theory courses. In this history and theory of urbanism and suburbanism class, we study the writings of seminal theoreticians and practitioners of urban design. The students select some early and some living practitioners like you and present their research to the class. Anyway, I'm delighted to have you answering our questions. Let me introduce you to the director of our program, Professor Marcella del Signore. Marcella is an associate professor, and she directs our Master of Science in Architecture, Urban and Regional Design program. Her work focuses on the intersection of architecture and urbanism with technology in public and cultural realm. She is the author of 5 books that engaged in public realm, socio-technological systems, urban prototyping, and data-driven protocols framed through the lens of interscholar design approaches.
Hi, Steiner. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We are delighted and honored to have you as part of this program. And so welcome to New York Institute of Technology, School of Architecture and Design. And thank you again for joining us for the Conversation in Urban Design series. So I will quickly introduce you, and then I'm going to introduce the students who's going to conduct the interview, and then we're going to start with the questions. So Frederick Steiner is the Dean at the University of Pennsylvania, Stuart Weitzman School of Design. Most recently, he served as the Dean of the School of Architecture and Harry M. Rockwell Chair at the University of Texas at Austin for 15 years. Dean Steiner was a Fulbright A scholar at Wageningen University, the Netherlands, and a Rome Prize Fellow in Historic Preservation at the American Academy in Rome. He's a fellow of both the American Society of Landscape Architects and the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture, and a scholar at the Penn Institute for Urban Research. Dean Steiner helped establish the Sustainable Sites Initiative, the first program of its kind, to offer a systematic, comprehensive rating system designed to define sustainable land development and management. I will now introduce KARAN AMBARDEKAR from Mumbai, India, which is one of our graduate students in the MS in Architecture, Urban and Regional Design program at NYIT. And KARAN will conduct the interview. So thank you, Dean Steiner, again for joining us, and we are delighted to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the introduction. Hello, Professor Steiner. Before I start with the questions, I would just want to say this, that in the earlier part of the year, I studied your work and contributions in urban design and also had a chance to present it to our class. And to get a chance to interview you right now is an experience which I don't think I can ever forget in my life. So thank you again. So resuming with the first question that I have, when you were a student at the University of Cincinnati, you were involved in the very first Earth Week in 1970. How did that experience play a part in shaping your career?
Well, it was life-changing because similar to today, there was a considerable amount of student activism at the time around civil rights and women's rights. And of course, the war in Vietnam was going on at the time, and there were student demonstrations about that. And intertwined in all that was a rising concern about the environment. And so I was active in, I did a lot of marching in those days, and it's kind of interesting to see people sad and on one hand that we still need to march, but at the same time, a similar kind of energy. And as you noted, I was involved in the first Earth Day, and one of my task was I designed a poster and all of that for the event, the week. It was a week at the time with, And it was supposed to be, the term used in those days was a teach-in. It was supposed to be a teaching moment. And to do that, we had a collection of books on the environment. And so my job was to collect the books on the environment. So kind of like a reading list, but people could come and look at. And unlike today, there were very few. There were very few books that related to the environment. There was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac, and then Design with Nature. And I was a design student, and suddenly I look at this large format book, turned it to the back, and there was one of the early black and white images of the Earth from space. And I was starstruck, and I decided, gosh, I don't want to be a design student anymore. I want to go study with Ian McHarg and learn how to design with nature. So it was a moment of profound significance for me. It literally changed my life. Cincinnati has a co-op program for students in architecture and design and planning. So I changed the direction of my co-op quarters and started to work for a developer who was planning a new town. So I became very involved in the design of new communities as well. So it was a very, very important moment for me, the first Earth Day and our first Earth Week. And then, of course, we celebrate Earth Day, which was part of it now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your response. And I'm glad you mentioned Ian McHarg, because my next question is going to be about that. So going on to the next question, I would want to ask you, could you describe the influence that Ian McHarg has played in your career as a designer and as a mentor?
Well, he was a very important mentor to me. When I was a graduate student, he was sort of a famous, somewhat distant professor. He had just lost his wife as well. And so he was also, at the time, very sad because of his personal situation. Then I decided, I started to teach without a PhD and decided that probably it would be good to get a PhD if I wanted to stay. I wanted to practice mostly. And I, like many people, graduated in the middle of a recession. So there weren't a lot of jobs, but there was academic jobs. And it turned out a lot of universities wanted to hire students of Ian McHarg. So I was lucky to get a job up in the Pacific Northwest and learn that as an academic, I could choose my projects. So I developed kind of an academic practice. I still do that. But I can choose the projects. Unlike a firm, I don't have to take, not all firms take all projects, but I can pick and choose. So when I came back, this is the third time I've lived in Philadelphia. So when I came back in the early 80s to get my PhD, the cornerstone of the Penn Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning is a studio called LARP 501, where you learn the McHarg method. And the person that coordinated that had just left the university. And so McHarg asked if I would coordinate it and teach it with him and collect this group of ecologists and social scientists and architects and planners who are teaching people how to design with nature. And during that experience, I became much closer with Ian, and we became, the relationship evolved. And he was, at the same time, he had an autobiography that he had been working on for several years. And by that time, I had had some experience in publishing. And oddly, I kind of became a little bit of his collaborator and helped him publish the autobiography. It's called A Quest for Life. And during that process, I realized he had a lot of papers that hadn't been collected in book form. So we then edited a book together, and through that we became good friends. So it was an evolving friendship. He was somebody that was very loyal to his students and very supportive of his students, and I benefited greatly from that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that elaborate response you had. Thank you. Moving on to the next question. We have enjoyed and learned from many of your books like Living Landscapes 1 and 2, Human Ecology, and Urban Ecological Design. Are you working on any new research projects and books that you would like to share?
Yeah, I can't stop writing, I guess. I'm currently working. Before I left Texas, one of my colleagues put a proposal to the U.S. Department of Transportation to look at mega regional planning and infrastructure, and ask, even before I came back to Penn, we wanted Penn to be a partner with us. So there are 4 universities involved in this partnership: the University of Texas at Austin, Louisiana State University, Texas Southern University, which is HBCU, and the University of Pennsylvania. So with the director of the CM2 effort, whose name is Ming Zhang, and then Bob Yarrow, who was a professor of practice here at Penn, and also the director of the Regional Plan Association in New York. Bob and Ming and I are writing a book, we're almost done with it, called Mega Regions for America's Future. Looking, and we, excuse me, we were kind of waiting for the election on the language, either to be optimistic or to be, whatever the opposite of optimistic is, because Biden is very interested in, obviously he's a big fan of Amtrak. And so we were able to sort of position it, the book, as a way to develop large-scale infrastructure projects while protecting large large landscapes as well. So that book will be, it's the Lincoln Institute is publishing it. So it's been and it's kind of interesting working with Ming and Bob, because Ming is a sort of MIT trained guy who's very analytical, and Bob is a sort of a politician, a New York area politician kind of guy. And so I feel like the middle sibling between the two of them, trying to find a voice that is both bold like Bob, but also thorough and analytical like Ming. So it's been a fun project.
Thank you for letting us know about that.
Thank you again. And it sounds like your last project is going to be very instrumental for the United States and the world. Good luck to you.
We'll hope.
Coming down to my last question, your criticism to the Texas campus carry law was highly instrumental to your move from University of Texas to University of Pennsylvania School of Design. As a student of urban planning and research, I foresee myself eventually heading into policy. What are the fundamentals that one could keep in mind before designing a policy which is fair and just towards bringing a positive change?
Well, the Texas carry law, I loved Austin. I loved, I'm from Ohio, as you noted. Originally, I'm kind of not a typical Texan, but I really fell in love with Austin. It's a great city. University of Texas is great, but the problem is, like many public institutions, it's been picked apart. And at one time, 50% of the university's budget came from the state, and now it's about 12%. And the carry law, we didn't think was going to get passed. and the Republicans made a compromise with the representative from Baylor, or from Waco, which is where Baylor is, to exclude private universities at the last minute. So it was a if they thought it was so good, why would private universities be exempt? So I think that if I would have resigned and said, Dean unhappy with state budget, I wouldn't have been on BBC or PBS or any of the attention I got. But guns, it was, I suppose, choosing a battle. I actually told Penn to try to recruit me 5 years earlier, and I wasn't interested at the time. But because of the Kerry law, I said, well, let's talk about it. And I realized that Penn was my first love, and so it was a good place to come back to for the third time. So I think your question in planning theory has been dominated, probably since the 80s by incrementalism and incremental change. And now we're in a period where incremental change is not acceptable. I mean, young people want change more rapidly, so I think it's one of the things is to understand the moment you're in as much as possible, and realize that at sometimes the best you can do is incremental change. But there are times when, times of crisis, and I think the COVID pandemic is obviously a global crisis, as is global warming. The Black Lives Matter movement is certainly, societies around the world face inequalities and prejudice. In the United States, it was one of the founding sins of our country to allow slavery, that and killing indigenous people. So it's a moment now that there's a real opportunity, and I'm really heartened to see, especially so many architects and landscape architects and designers interested in this issue. I haven't seen anything like it since the late 60s and early 70s. So I think it's a time where bold actions is possible, and bold changes are possible. So I think in policy, you have to choose when to move fast and when to move slow, and when to clog the machine up so that bad things don't happen.
Thank you so much. I had a really inspiring experience, which I would share with the world, and it's going to be a good opportunity for me. Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you so much again, Professor.
Thank you. Thanks. I enjoyed the question.